Hey guys, happy Friday. I missed you. I missed you the last 2 weeks. We had a great trip out to Creativation and back, and we are missing you guys and ready to do another class. So today is a really great way to just say welcome back, because it's a two-part class. Today we're going to go over creating what is like, I call them tiles because they're little squares, and each of them has its own unique design. And one of the reasons I like it is, well, I love doing peyote stitch and I love doing patterns in peyote stitch. But have you ever sat down for a really big peyote stitch project? And it's like, let's say it's a bracelet like this and you're stitching it for like 2 months, right? That can be really like, there's no satisfaction of completion. And so I got this idea to make these little small charm size ones. And then there's all these different ways you can put them together. They can become an earring. And depending on the positioning of the pattern, you can make it into a bracelet by connecting with stones or crystal, fire polish, whatever you got. You can make it into just a simple earring. And you can add charms. You can even put fringe on it. I've been experimenting. And of course, in part 2, we're going to do all that. We're going to do today we're going to focus on just doing the stitching and reading the pattern, getting those basics down. And then next week, we're going to do things like jazz them up, right? Put them together, make them into jewelry or other things. Like some of the other ideas that I had were like purse charms, keychains, anything like just a little like, even you could stitch 2 together as a necklace and have it be like a little prayer pocket. Like there's so many things you could do. So, but just to get the basics down, today we'll focus reading patterns. So reading patterns is like easy, but if you've never done it before, or even if you have done it before, but you're just picking it back up after a break, it can be kind of daunting to get into it. So I have some tips and tricks that I can share today to getting going with patterns. And then of course, we have a bunch of new patterns to share that are in addition to the ones that we put in here. In here is all like spring floral. And I just kind of kept it like Mayflowers, right? April showers, Mayflowers. And then I got an idea to do some potted plants. And I have yet to make the same one twice. So they're all different. And then I was thinking like, oh, well, hey, if we've done some potted plants, let's do some abstract ones. And the abstract ones were really interesting. They're really literally just like colored blotches that were inspired by Mediterranean tiles. But when you kind of try to bring them into like a pixelated format, it shifts things around and they look totally different, but in a really cool way. And so the earrings I'm wearing right now, I'll show these up close on the mat, but I did these in a different kind of suspension mode, but they're very cool looking too. So we've got a lot of cool stuff to share today. I think I'll go ahead and just jump in here on the mat showing you supplies. And I think the first thing to mention about supplies is that as far as the seed beads, this handout has a lot of seed beads in it. And I did that because just in case anyone loves these and wants to do these, I used mostly Toho. But if you want to use delicas, these were made of delicas. And a delica version of any of these patterns is going to be spectacular. And I saw Lena did a post today. She's got a bunch of delicas out. I cannot wait to see, Lena, how yours come out. They're going to be amazing. And then I also have, I've done a few with the check, and I have those over here that I'll bring out probably next week because I'm going to put them together in an even different way than we have in the part 2 handout. So that one is already growing for next week. But so basically what you need is just any seed beads. So my recommendation is to keep consistent with brand and size. So like if you want to use your Tohos, stick with your 11-0 Tohos together in one design. If you want to use delicas, go ahead and grab a bunch of delicas and stick with that for one design. If you try to mix up like size 10 check with the 11-0 Toho, that might work. But if you were to try to put an 11-0 check with an 11-0 Toho, you're not gonna get a perfect square. You're gonna get something that's a little different shape. And then it makes the peyote stitch a little more advanced because you're trying to connect things that are slightly different in size from each other. So you're gonna have the best luck working with the same size seed beads and the same brand. But that said, use what you have, whatever you've got, but prioritize like shape over color. And I want to explain that here in just a minute too. So I'm gonna move some of these away off the mat. All these strings are still here because I'm gonna need them next week. But this is one of the bonus patterns I'm gonna bring this over and show you what I did here. So originally when I designed it, I just kind of went with the palette that came from the inspiration that I was using at the time. And I just wrote, hey, this is kind of like a white color. That's matte black. That's this, that's that, right? Then I went and said, what's in my stash that I can make look like that? And so these are colors that are in store at Michael's in our delicas. And so what I did is I took all of the colors here, I laid them out A, B, C, D. I'm going to show you that here in a minute. And then just kind of went with what I had. And it does look different than the picture, but you can still make that work. A, B, C, D, it all lines up really great. Here's another example. That's this one right here. Just made that with the delicas. So not exactly like the picture, but pretty close. And then last but not least here on the back, I've got this little one. I felt like this was the most different because my original vision was like a hawthorn yellow inside. But then when you use silver lined gold, I like that even more. So don't get stuck on like, oh, I don't have that color. That's not going to work. Use a color you have, something close or even different, and just see how it looks. Because this one is completely different than that picture, but it's so amazing. I think it might be my favorite. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to just grab one of our patterns from the handout. And then I'm going to lay out my colors like in a row, A, B, C, D, and C. I have made, and I've actually, these are from a previous class we did, but I made a bunch of these little, another thing you could do is you could go and get some label stickers and you could stick labels on your mat. When you start working with some of these patterns that have more than like 4 or 5 colors, it can speed things up for you. And it's really helpful if you lay them out like that with the letters. That can really help. So I think this one might be from our, gosh, we did a brick stitch class last December, and I think that's where I got these from. But anyway, so that's what I got. I don't know if I need all those colors, but they're here. And because they're a little bigger and easier to see, I'm going to be working with my Toho stash. These are all from Michael's, every single one. All these colors are in store, and they are in the handout. So if I use one, I will call it by the name that's on the bottle, and you should be able to find it here. That's if you like them. But like I was saying before, dig through your stash and see what you've got and use it, because it will work totally great. All right, and so, oh, and one more thing I forgot. Sorry, I'm gonna jump back really quick. I wanted to say, don't be afraid to change your background color. This is the same pattern, and one has a topaz, and I felt like the first time when I stitched this together that I wasn't feeling like it had enough contrast. See how they're so close? I persisted on, and it's still very beautiful, but I kind of wish I'd done it with more of a pop, right? So you could see it more. But that said, like this one with the gray as the background, you could do this California poppy with just like a beige or white background, or even like a sky blue, and it might make those greens pop out a little more. But you never know until you put it together. So sometimes you just land something you love, and sometimes you want to play with it a little more, and that's totally okay. It's part of the process. So I'm going to grab a pattern. And I'm going to start with this one because it's got a few things I want to demo. So the way the patterns are written is they are written where you'll see like row 1 and 2. And this is the word chart. So for example, oh yeah, Cindy's saying she likes the white backgrounds. I think in this particular design, it does help to have like a lighter color compared to what you've got stitched on top. So here's floral tile 2. And you're going to start with the row 1 and 2. So this is just stringing. You're going to string all the colors listed here. And what that represents is stringing but like this. So you're stringing the first 2 rows. If you wanted to do this on a visual method, I'm going to show you something that I got at in the prints. I guess it's I'm not sure what section this is, but I've shown this before. This is the printmaker. This is a magnetic board, and these are magnetic rulers. And these are in, I think they're in like the aisle where the crickets are and stuff, the joy stuff, at least in my store, they're in that aisle. But you might find it in the scrapbooking aisle at yours, depending on which store layout you have. But another way you could do this is print this out as a full page. Mine are half pages as a booklet print. Print yours out as a whole page. You can lay your magnetic rulers. It comes with 2. you can lay them out to see each row. If that's more visually effective for you for stringing. Mine is really tiny, it's a little hard to see, but that's one way you could do it. And each row is offset from the other. So row 1 for all those A's right there. And row 2 is the one below it, just slightly below it. And so you've got some C's creeping in there. So you'll see when you look at, here's rows 1 and 2 to string. I'm gonna flip to this page. You'll see mostly A's. And then they're throwing the C and the A and the C, the 7A. That's just this. C, A, C, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 A's. So hopefully that makes sense. That will jump out, and it won't take that shape until you add row 3. Row 3 is the row where you add a bead, skip a bead, add a bead, and that is going to start taking this shape. So let me show you what that looks like here on the first page of the handout. You'll string those 20 beads, and then you'll come along, you'll pick up a bead, you'll skip this first one and go through the second one. You skip the next one and go through the next one, and you'll do that for a total of 10 beads in each row from here out. Yeah, Patty says row 3 is where the magic is. That's exactly right. You don't have peyote stitch until you've done row 3 if you're starting this way. Now there are some tools out there I've heard of that you can start stitches differently, but this is the way that most people do it, and it's the quickest way, I think, to get to it. The one thing that I wanted to make sure I share today is when you have a pattern that's not all the same color in the first 2 rows, which I did on purpose here. A lot of times I avoid it when I'm going to teach because it spins on you. So you're pulling, the method I'm going to show you for starting rows 1 and 2 and 3, you're pulling apart after each bead add to kind of make them pop. And if you have like this C and this A and this C here, one of them could spin up into row 1 instead of remaining in row 2. I usually just let that happen. And then when I come along and I'm adding row 3, I just pay attention, sometimes using the visual, sometimes just paying attention as I've got this done, that every row ended up where it was. So I'll explain that as we go. It'll make more sense as we jump in. And it's the only tricky part. Everything else is so easy. So yeah, let's grab. So this is floral tile 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to string that 20 beads. And so here's my letters again. And I'm going to go ahead and just choose colors really quick here. So let's find a white. Let's get a white bead. I'll go with these. And this is kind of like a matte white. It's going to be pretty. And there's my A. Let's get my B. I need a blue. So I think I'm going to go with this beautiful cobalt here. There's my B. And looking over here at my pattern, C is a lighter blue. So this is where I might get creative. I need a lighter blue. And even though this doesn't exactly match, it's more of a cornflower on the pattern, I'm going to go with this one. A couple of reasons. It has really great contrast. And I have it, right? C. And it's looking like D is a fuchsia on my pattern. How many do I need? C, A, B, C. I'll stop here with C and show you the start because I'm only going to need A, B, and C for my first couple of rows. And we'll add the rest as we go. Yeah, so we just need our A, B's, and C's for rows 1, 2, and 3. So let's do that first. And I didn't talk about thread yet, and that's because the sky's kind of the limit there. You can use what you're comfortable using, and it's also going to make a difference what beads you chose. Like if you're working with Delicos versus 11 OC beads. I'm going to be working with this today with some Nymo, but you can use Wildfire. You can use any other beading thread that you like. I feel like there's a lot of threads that'll work, and I'm going to be working with a dark color so you can see what I'm doing. But I recommend matching your thread as close as you can to the color of the bead that is going to be your strongest edge. So like, unless of course you're going for something that's different, like if you want it to stand out. But here's some good examples. Mostly this is a white design, so I used white thread, but I could have gone thread if I wanted. Here's the red at the edge. It depends what colors you have, but for the most part, I think some white thread is what you're going to be wanting to use for these, if you've got that handy. And then last but not least, I had one other thing I was going to show. Thought I put it out here. Well, it looks like I didn't bring it up here, but I had some thread conditioner. So I know I've shown that in a couple other classes, but it's an optional thing that you can do for if you're working with Nymo. You can put some beeswax on it, or you can use Thread Heaven, all of which you can find in the store. And I'm also working with a size 10 beading needle. Size 10, size 12, anything's going to work great. So I don't have a trick for you for threading the needle like I do with the Wildfire, where you flatten it and it goes through nice and easy. In this case, you just kind of help it go through by pinching the end as close as you can, so that when it's sticking out from your fingers, it's like about that much, right? And then you bring your needle to it so you can kind of see what's happening there. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to cut, and the distance to cut. So I put 60 inches in the handout. It's more than you need, but it gives you some extra, because at the end, what we do next week, we're going to do some stitching together of stuff. We're going to be creating bicone connections. Maybe you're going to put a wire guardian on it. Maybe you're going to do an attachment for the little finding that we're going to show next week. So in all those cases, I thought a little extra can't hurt. So 60 inches, leaving about a 10 to 15 inch tail when we start. And I'll show the tail here. Should be good. And pen trim here. All right. So we're going to string 10A, CAC, and 7A. This might take me just a minute. Seven, 8. Here's 9 and 10. Here's my C. And then I need 7 more of my color A. 5, 6, and 7. Okay. So that is going to become what is rows 1 and 2. Okay. And so now I'm going to go to my row 3. And for row 3, my first 3 beads are going to be A. So let's do those. So let's pick up 1 color A. Bring that down. And here's our, let me bring this a little closer. Here's our original row. We want to skip that first bead and just go through that second bead right there. So I'm going to skip the first one, go through my second bead, and pull tight. And there we go. So what we're going for is, do you see how it made this little pop right here? Don't worry if it doesn't do that every time you add a bead, but it can help if you just pull your working and tail threads apart. And there's our first little pop. And I'm going to pick up my next one. And I'm going to skip the next bead in our row and go through the next one. And so this is pretty much it. We're just going to do this 10 times. This is time number 2. I'm going to pull that down and just pull the working and tail threads apart. And so you might get something that does that. Don't worry. Just go ahead and straighten it out. And it should look something like that. I don't know if you guys can see. I'll turn it to the side a little bit. There you go. With the Toho seed beads I'm working with, it's going to be more organic looking than your Delica snap and pop, right? The Delicas just go pop, pop, pop when you do this. The Delicas do that because they're precision cylinder. These have just a little more organicness to it, so you're going to get some wave, but still really pretty. And this disappears and evens out as you add each row, so no worries there. Just keep going. You want to skip your first bead here. I'm sorry, let me get up a little higher. So skipping my first bead, and then I'm going to go through my second bead. I'm going to pull tight. You guys are pretty quiet out there. Let me know if you have questions. I hope I'm not going too fast or anything. But basically, we're just picking up a bead. We skip the next bead in the chain and we go through the next one. And so there's that. Wanda says, I missed the comment before, but hopefully that means you guys are doing good. Good out there. Okay, so that was our 3 A's, right? We added 1, 2, 3. We're coming up on that tricky spot where we got to make sure we know where our C is, right? But we're here at 3A. We did those. So now we've got 2B. So let's pick up 1B. And this is where I might use my color chart, the pictorial, but so I'm going to skip 1 and go through the next one. Pull tight. Goal being to get that little pop that we love so much about peyote. And I got to do 1 more bead. Skip 1, go through the next one. Oops, sorry, I hit my light. Okay, and there's, again, pulling those working and tail threads apart, and there's our pop. Okay, and so I wanted to show really quick, just a really quick reference back to the pictorial. So we have put our row 3 beads, the B and the V, right here toward the bottom. I know that's a little hard to see. I'm going to bring it closer. But I'm kind of encouraging now my work to stay in the position that it's originally, see how it's starting to spin? But I know that those 2 beads I just added, those 2 B's, those are my row 3, so those need to stay facing kind of down. And we'll have a chance to fix it again as we're adding row 4, but it's just something to think about as you're going along, that we want it to stay. But those 2 B's are down and the 2 C's are just kind of above it like that. And we'll check it one more time when we're adding row 4, but so far so good. Okay, so we just did our 2 B's. So now I'm going to do 1 C. There's a C bead. And again, I'm going to skip a bead and go through the next one. Hold tight. And let's just take a quick look. And it, for the most part, stayed in plane with my 2 B's before it, see? And that was serendipity. It worked. It doesn't always work out like that for me. There's a chance, like I said before, we can spin it around again at the end, but that one worked. And now I've got these remaining ones to do. We did 3 A's, 2 B's, 1 C, and I've got to do 4 A's. And skip a bead, go through the next one. And all the rows after this are not going to take this long. This one, those first rows are the ones that take a long time. All the other ones after this are not going to be that bad. Just skipping a bead and going to the next one. And all my colors are color A for now. And the last one. Here's my last color A. And we're going to skip a bead and go through the next one. All right. There we go. Let's take a quick look at it. Notice it's not totally perfectly, in a line. It's not going to do that till we get the rest of our rows start to add. But like row 5, row 6, you start to get more of a, back and forth. That makes sense. But here we are. We're good. This is our rows 1, 2, and 3. So all set there. And I've been using the word chart. That's kind of my go-to thing. I like the word chart because it's just easier for me to see. And I often print my patterns 2 pages down to 1 page, like you see here in a booklet format, which saves a little paper, but it makes your pictorial kind of small. If you were someone who likes to follow your pattern pictorially and using that ruler method, I would say print this as like a whole page. And then this will be pretty big at that point, and you'll be able to do that ruler method where you can guide yourself row by row. But so far, I always teach with the word chart because I feel like it makes the most sense, but I'm not saying that it doesn't work the other way, because I know a lot of people love doing that and it works great for them. All right, so now I'm on row 4. All right, so row 4 is gonna start, we're gonna just do 2A, 3C. I'm gonna have to find a color E here pretty quick, but let's start with these first 5 beads here, 2A's and 3C's. So we've got my A bead, and here's our first turn. Go ahead and just kind of pull tight with one side and maybe the other, and you can kind of pin it like that. But there's another chance to fix it after that. Make sure you're headed on the side where your row 3 is, right? And not your row 1. And pull down. And right before, see, I've got this loop here. Right before I pull this part tighter, I'm going to do one more working thread and tail thread tightening, pinch it, and do a pull. And now my turn locks into place like that. And you can also do like a pinch and pull, where you pinch this side and pull this side. That'll also tighten things up for you. So here's my next color A bead. I'll just go through this one. And again, just making sure nothing spins on me. And now I need to do 3 color C. So this is that beautiful turquoise. And I'm gonna work in this direction. A little easier for me. That was number 1. Here's number 2. And then last but not least, number 3. And here I want to take a quick look and make sure. Now I remember from the picture that all my row 1 was white beads. Let me bring this a little closer to explain. I remember in row 1, this whole top was white, but this would be a chance to double check and just make sure if you weren't sure that it was, and make sure that you're not going into the wrong bead in case it twisted on you. Like if it, this was to flip that way, right? And mine's good, but just that's somewhere you want to check when you start getting into where the colors aren't the same anymore, when they're switching up on you. So that was my first spot that was like that. So there's that color C. And another way you can tell, if you're in a different pattern and you just want a spot to error check yourself, you can look at it and see that that C is going into a C. So there's my row 3 and 4. Just another extra way to check, but I think the easiest reference, at least in this pattern for me, was just knowing that these are all A beads here at the top. So as long as these are all A beads here, I'm good. Okay, so we just did our 3C. So now we need 3E. So let's go back to the colors and let's figure out what my color E is. I'm going to skip the D for now. We'll go to E. And E is like a grape. Ooh, I have a good grape. I know exactly which bead I want. Thinking I might go with this metallic. That's going to be really beautiful. It's almost cobalty, but it looks great to me. We'll get that one out. That is my color E. And this is what I do, guys. I don't actually do all my colors. I mean, I sometimes do, but for the most part, I'm working with them in the order they come in, because I change my mind a lot and then I end up having to scoop them back into the tube. But for some reason, once I see this, the first few rows, it sometimes changes my mind about what color I might want. So if I've got options, I might wait. But we're going to do 3 of these, 3 purples, according to my pattern. Oh, I missed a tip from Lena. Shout that out again if you can. I missed it.
Hey, Danielle.
Hey.
I just want to let you know that Lena, who does so much for us at the company and a lot of different jewelry making capacities, says she's not a seed beater. and we think she can be one. So she said she knew nothing about the word chart. She chose a flower pattern from the printout, and because she's super visual, she used a ruler and just followed line by line, talking out loud, 2 pink, 3 white, and then again, we'll all laugh along with her for sure.
No, I know what you mean. And that is definitely like a lot of people really love doing it that way. So what Lena's doing, let me show you guys, is she's got 2, you're using 1 ruler or 2, Lena? You can do it with 1, but so like, for example, we just did row 4. So that's row 1, 2, 3, and this would have been row 4 here. So that's how you would isolate your row 4. See, I just did my 3 E's. That's really hard to see, guys. Sorry about that. My imagery. There we go. Let's slide that up a little bit. And these magnetic rulers are really, really handy for this, but okay. So we just did 2A, 3C. There's those 3 E's. And now we've got 2 A's. The bonus of doing it this way is you have, what's it called? Like, confidence markers as you go through, and you add a C and you see, oh, that C is going through a C, right? See, like C through C, E through B, E through B, now it's E through A. So that can be really handy. If this is visually how you like to work, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it this way. It's totally possible. And if you like the word chart, that's great too. And I'm just sticking with the word chart because I feel like I'm less likely to make a mistake on a live with my word chart. So I'm going to go and just bring that back. We're going to finish up row 4. In row 4, I did my 3's. Now I'm going to do my 2 A's. And remind me at the end, guys, I was going to talk a little bit about color numbers. Sometimes patterns will give you color numbers, and I put an example of that together so I could show it to you and how you can totally ignore it if you want. But there's rows 1 through 4 right there of our tile. So let's go to row 5, and then I'll finish row 5, and then Carmi, if there's anyone who wants starting again, unless everyone's good, I'll keep going and we'll introduce some new concepts. I'm going to start with 2 A's here and go to 1 C. Oop. And here's a good spot to show something. See how it loosened up on me right there? Before I go any further, I'm going to do a little thumbnail thing and tighten that up. And then I'll bring this down. So there's my first bead of row 5. Here's 1 more A. And here's row C. Sorry, color C. Color C is the next one in my pattern. Oh, now I need 2F. I don't have an F chosen yet. So D, here's F. Let's look back over and see what we got here. And it looks like F is an orange. Got a good orange. Let's go find it. 5. I think that one will do. I am using a lot of silver lined, which can sometimes be too much silver lined. You know what I mean? So it's something to think about. I'm going to go with it because this is the orange I have, but if I had an opaque, I might choose the opaque over this silver line because I'm doing a lot of that here. And so I do try to mix up my finishes. It gives you a little bit of texture and depth and contrast also. So here's my orange. How many oranges do I need again? There's 1. I think it was 2. Yeah, I need a second one. All right, here's a C. So you see from here on out how much easier and faster it gets is because you've got an easy to see up bead. And forgive me if I didn't mention, but I've been going through the up beads, right? So you can see this as skipping the next bead and going to the next. It's the same thing we did in row 1, but now we don't have to find it as much because it just pops up. You can see it. But it is still the same mantra, skip a bead, go through the next bead. So I did 2 Fs, did 1 C. Here's my first of 3 Bs. And I could do some more contrast between B and C. So when I make another one, I might try to pull a different lumen. And last but not least, I've got 1A to end my row. Let's do the thumbnail thing. The thumbnail thing is pinch there, pull here. You can even use your tail thread again. And there we go. Now you start to get, here about row 5, you start to get something that looks a lot more like you expect it to look, right? But you got to get all the way to row 5 before you get that. And I think that's what kind of maybe turns people off from trying seed beading a peyote stitch, because that's true in like almost every stitch that we do, is you got to get through those first few rows and then things start to make sense. Yeah, and so there's row 5. Let me check in really quick, see how everyone is doing, and make sure I didn't lose anybody on starting.
Danielle,
Yeah.
I think because the first 3 rows, it feels wonky, a little bit harder for you to work. And so it would be great. I think you should show another row or 2, because for new people, it's not clear now how now the shape is really there, how much easier it is for you to know exactly where the bead is going, because there is a really defined up. So if you could just show a little bit more on how quick you're going through the row, that would be great.
Yeah, so finish row 6 next, do you think?
Yes.
Okay. So row 6, let's just go back to the pattern here. And again, I'm just working from the word chart. So I'm going to do what's here, 2A, 1E, 5D is 2A. Do we have a D yet? No, we need a D. Let's find the color D. Okay, so color D. This was fuchsia. I skipped that on purpose because I don't have a fuchsia that I'm in love with. So let's find one that works. And if we can't find a fuchsia that I love, maybe we just don't do pink. Maybe we'll do red. Because I'm feeling like we need more pops, more contrast. So I'm thinking it needs to be a red. This is the color Pepper Red in the handout. And it's not a fuchsia, and it's but it's still gonna look really cool. So going back there, let's get those 2 A's on here. Starting with the first one, I just went into my up bead. And also you can tell what row you're on. Let's say you put this down and you forgot. Count the sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can see we're starting row 6 there. Just by counting those edge beads, that's how you can find your place. And these aren't very big, so even if you had to count out 10 on each side, it wouldn't take that long. And you could get there. On the really big pieces, I have another method I can show you guys later. Going to an E next. And then we're going to do 5D. Here's that Pepper Red. And something I found in one of my other patterns was if you are working with these same colors I am, you could get a really, really gorgeous result if you combine this Pepper Red with orange and then the clear pink. I'll show you that tile after this. It's really cool looking. And now I just need 2A. All right, there's my tail getting caught. There's 1. And then here's number 2. So that's super fast. Row 6 there.
Danielle,
yeah.
With the time that's left, I think everyone would love to see you start one more time.
Okay.
And if you could just show them now that it's laying flat, how do we know what row we're on if we come back a week later? How do we count?
One way to tell, and if you're working with these tiles, the best way is just to go ahead and count, because the worst case scenario is you're going to have to count 10 beads on each side, right? But 1, 2, and 3, count this side here. We'll see where my needle's moving. And then 4, 5, and 6. And I'm exiting from that bead here. So I see that I have just completed row 6 based on that.
Excellent.
And then another way you could do it if you're working with a super big pattern and you don't want to have to go down and scroll and scroll and scroll, keep a pencil handy, something you can erase. And then at the end of a row where you're leaving off, if you're going to stop for the day, especially if you think your ruler might get moved or something, just put a little dot at the end of the row you just finished, a little pencil dot. And then when you pick up your work again, first thing you do when you sit back down, erase that dot, start working, and then mark it again if you need to as you get going. And so what I'm going to do really quick is just set this one aside, and I'm going to start another one. And so again, about 60 inches for a tile if you're making the tiles. And then that's going to leave you a lot of extra. And that extra is used to make the connections in part 2. And I'm just using some regular scissors. Cut that thread. Use some thread conditioner if you have it handy. Beeswax, Thread Heaven. And then to get it threaded, just want to kind of take a really small amount of it and have it just kind of point out from your fingers. And I licked it. It helps for a minute. There we go. Just fold it over maybe 10 and 15 inches so that you don't have a lot you're working with. Also, if you condition it, the spool memory, this curlicue stuff will go away if you run it against a conditioner. All right. And so we're going to go back to row 1 and 2 in the pattern. So let's just move this down really quick. Okay. So there's rows 1 and 2. So we're going to string those colors in that order. So here's my 10 A's. And take a quick look at them. If you see any that are wonky, like that very first bead I picked up, do you notice how he's got a little bit of a different shape? That might not serve you well on a first few rows stitching. You could probably use them later. But try to choose some that have, they're not going to be exact, but some that have a kind of a similar shape to each other. If you've got any outliers, just go ahead and down select those. So there's my 10. And now I need a C. I need an A again. Here's my C. And then 7A. Okay. Bring those down and leave about 10 inches of thread on that side. It's going to be your tail. And then come over to your pattern and find your row 3. There's my row 3 right there. And let's start with our 3 A's. This is going to be the pop, where it starts to pop into the shape of peyote. So we'll start with my first bead for color A there. And here's my original 20 beads we strung. I'm gonna skip that first bead. Just move it down out of the way. A little easier to see there. And then go through the second bead. Some people do use a stop bead. And then one other thing is try not to puncture your thread. I had just done that. So I pulled my needle out just to make sure your thread can move freely, especially on these first few stitches. It's really easy to puncture it. And there we go. And so it should do this little peyote stitch pop. And now again, I'm pulling on my working and tail thread, just pulling them apart. Okay, I need another A bead. Let's pick up another A bead. We're going to skip the next one in the row here and then go through the one after that. So skip a bead and go through the next bead. And pull tight and pull it apart. And so you should just get something that looks like that. It looks like that little, the rock statues for a second there. Here's my third A. I'm just getting that from the word chart. And we're going to go ahead and skip the next bead and go through the one after that. So we're skipping that one, going through that one. And you know, you can help it a little bit. Mine's not doing exactly what I want right now. It's kind of moving a bit on me. It could be lots of reasons, but see, I'm getting a little curl. I'm going to keep going. I know I can fix that later, but if you get that, it is normal, especially when you're not working with a precision cylinder bead. If you're working with organics like this, you're going to get a little wobble there. It's okay. We know it works because we got that shape. So those were my 3A in row 3. Let's go to 2B. So here's number 1 of the 2 there. And we're going to skip the next bead in the row, which is this one here, and go through the next bead. And I need another B. So skipping the next bead and going through the one after that. All set there. 1C. So the next bead in my row. So skip the next bead. That's this one. And now I want to go through that bead right there. And we're going to end with 4A. So here's one color A, or skip this one. Come down through this one. And what I'm doing here is just pulling those working tail threads apart every time I do an add. Skip one, go through the next one. You'll know if you've missed one because when you get to the end, you'll have an odd bead. So there's an error, a built-in error check for you. Skip one, go through the next one. And then last but not least, let's go through, pick up a bead. I'm going to skip one and go through that last bead. All right. And so there's rows 1, 2, and 3. They look like that. We've got some spinning action going on there. No problem. We're just going to look at our pictorial and make sure that our row 1 has the beads in the correct order. And on this pattern, our row 1 has all A. So I'm just making sure we've got all A here running. Row 1. And my row 2 has our 2 C's and 1 B here. Or sorry, 2 B's and 1 C. And apologies for the lack of contrast between those B and C. They look a lot brighter in person for me than they do when I'm holding them up here on the screen. But the cobalt blue is my B, and that light aqua is my C. So there you go. There's rows 1, 2, and 3. Let's throw a row 4 on there because that's where it really starts to make sense. So we've got those. Row 4. Bring that pattern back over here. I'm going to slide this down. All right, row 4, we need 2A and then 3C. 3E and 2A. And so here's our first A bead. And I'm going to keep this tight and then just bring this bead down through the first up bead here. And it's essentially the same thing we were doing where we're skipping a bead and going through the next one. Just like that. And it's going to wiggle on you a little bit, especially this first part, this first row. So you got something that looks like this, where there's really loose connection here. So this is the working thread. This is the tail thread. Tighten it down one more time, see? So that we've got that shape that we want. And I might even pinch it right here above that bead and pull. Another thing you could do is have a stop bead, and you can tighten that stop bead down. And that whisper shaped crescent that's going on, that'll go away after row 4 or 5. So here's our next A. Let's go down through this next one. Bring that down and pull tight. And now C, 3 C beads. Here's one. And how are we doing on time? We're getting there. I think one of these takes me to make a tile. If I'm just going at speed and not really focusing on anything else, you know, not watching a show or something, I can probably make one of these in about 20 minutes. Maybe 30, 35 minutes, depending if I'm mistaken enough to pull something out. That happens. And so I've switched now. I did my 3 C's. Now I'm doing 3 E. Here's 2. And then here's 3. And last but not least, I got 2A. So there's rows 1, 2, 3, and 4. Stitched up into our first rows there. And from here on out, it's smooth sailing. You're just walking through that word chart and adding each bead into the next up bead. And you'll have to do that for approximately 30 rows. So each of the tiles that I made has 30 rows in it. And when you get to the end, you'll have one that looks like this. I'm going to bring this one over, and I'll bring the one that's actually being stitched here over in a second. But I wanted to show this one really quick because earlier I was mentioning what happens if you put the pepper red with orange and pink. And this is the pink one. It looks really cool. You get a really textured looking red. Now the pepper red and the orange aren't popping from each other here on the camera for you guys, but for me in person, they're really popping. And they make it look very, just really ornate and cool. Wish I could make that come over on the screen, but try that combo, because that's these 3 here. I was really loving on that. And then let's see this pattern finished. Let's see this one. I've got that one over here. Is it this one? I gotta make sure I'm showing you the right one. I think it's this one. Super cute. And I did some variation, but it looks like I stuck with the pepper red on this one too. And there's the orange. You can see the orange in there. There's the grape. And it looks like for my color C, instead of that aqua, I think I was working with a Ceylon Purple in this case. So the color really does make a huge difference in the result you get, but it's still so pretty. You can see, let's put those together.
Danielle?
Yeah.
This will be my last interruption because we're coming to the end. Would you mind very much laying down your sample on the actual pattern?
Yeah,
there's a little bit of confusion about what you mean by left and right. And I think some people may think you're going up and down instead of across. So
okay. Yeah, let me talk about that for a second. That makes sense. It's a great question. And it's a reason I like the word chart. What the left and right is referring to is it's referring to here, what direction you're heading to and from, which rows start, right? I have a really hard time tracking that. I got to be honest. I have a hard time. The only reference point I can give you is where your tail position is, which is going to be hanging out over there. Here's the finished one for this design. And you see the tail over here. Sorry for the white thread, but your tail is really your only reference for that dimension. And it's why I like the word chart, because in my word chart, I actually just ignore left, right, left, right. I just go ahead and I know which row I'm on by counting my side beads. And whatever row my thread's hanging out on, that's the row I'm starting from. That's the direction I'm headed back from. And that's just my personal way of doing it. But these are valuable to a lot of people, especially if you are working from the chart with a ruler, like visually, it can really help you. But again, I just, I don't particularly use those as much, but most of your patterns are going to have that data if it's useful to you. And again, just to figure out like which side your tail is on, and you'll know that that's, hey, that's my right, that's my left. With the caveat that some patterns have the tail starting somewhere different, but you can always kind of guess. One way you can guess is, you remember when we first built the first 3 rows, your tail's always going to be on the side with 1 bead. So if you just isolate rows 1, 2, and 3, because remember the way you pull, you go through that last bead and you pull the working and tail threads apart. And that last bead is this one here. So that's another way you could figure out where your tail is. Hopefully that helps. But some patterns, and you have to just check or ask, some patterns might start at the bottom. So if you're starting down here, it's going to look the same, but it's going to have a different left to right orientation. So it's, yeah, that's a little pitfall in peyote that, that I apologize for that. It's definitely something that I wish, if I invented the system, might have done something differently. Like I would just not have that, but it is definitely something you'll see in a lot of patterns. So let's lay them out. Let's lay out all the patterns. So you got this one here. And unfortunately, the way I printed mine, this is the white background version of that one. And let's find the others. Put that. Here it is. Okay. So this one right here is this one with a different palette. I really wanted to use that topaz. Let me show you the shiny topaz. I get very caught up in my colors, and I really loved this as a background color because it was kind of a fall feeling, and I love brown. So that's this color as the background instead of like a white. And this is actually an ivory. I ignored that this is a white color, and I used the ivory color, which is this one here. Really pretty. So ignore all the suggested colors and do whatever you want. That's the gist. It's like you can just go to town, go crazy. But that's that one, and that's that one. This one here. Okay, and let's go to the next one here. The flower here is this one. Sorry, I'm just trying to show you where the tail is. So there's that flower. Who else do we have? This one is right here. Not really pretty. Who else do I have in here? There's this one. That's this one here with the gray. I wish I'd done that again in a different background color. This one you'll see another version of by next week, because I'm definitely going to restitch that one. And who have I skipped? I feel like I skipped some patterns somewhere. We did that one. We did that one. That's the one we just stitched. One of my pages has jumped away. Ah, got it. Okay, so this one is that one. And it's already been attached to a bracelet, but there's that one. I can actually do, I'll post in the Facebook group later. I can do a one-for-one layout photo. That's a little easier for you guys to see. Grab this one. It's not actually that one. Aha, here we go. That one is this one. I stayed pretty true to the colors on that one. And who's missing? The Maria flower. This just feels like Super Maria. So that's all the ones in the original handout. Oh no, I skipped one. I need one more for you guys. This is my favorite. Well, this and the rose, these two right here, ended up being my favorite. But this one is really cool. I've already made it into an earring for next week, but it's got the big rose base, and I'm going to play with those colors. I want more contrast going on in the flower, so I'm going to play with that. I might do a delicate version. And that leaves one last thing I wanted to mention. I know I'm a little over, but the one really cool thing about being able to use any beads is you can get different sizes. So I don't have a delicate version of my flowers yet. I'll do one, but in one of the bonus handouts when we did potted plants, they're the same counts. Just you get Toho 11-0, Miyuki Delica. And another thing I did is I switched the orientation. So on this one, the orientation is this side is the side, right? On these, that's made this way. So this gives you another opportunity to work. And one of the things you could do with something like this is you can attach a wire guarding top and bottom. And this is one of the other bonus patterns. And if you put a wire guarding, you can do that. But the reason I liked these like this is it gives you one more possibility is to stitch them all together as one bracelet. You could stack them this way and just stitch that direction. And in the case of the potted plants, you could connect them like this. And you could even mix them up with a flower. You could mix some of the tiles with these. So now it's your own choice, like which order to put them in and what pattern to do. You can just assemble them. So they're good as standalone jewelry. They're good as a standalone charm. They can become a regular stitched together bracelet, and they can become something like this, which we'll do next week. Something like that. And who knows, I have other ideas. These aren't even the only thoughts I had for connecting them. There's so many things. I mentioned the necklace with the little pocket. And I've been playing around with how to do that. I think the ideal way to do it would be with one of these, because these can connect in this direction. And then you would have them stitched together here and here and at the bottom, and it would open at the top, and you could put a charm in there, and there'd be necklace chain coming from here and from here. Just a little place to put. Those are kind of trending right now. I feel like those prayer pocket necklaces. So you could do that. Yeah, lots of me talking, but definitely lots of ideas too, I hope, for you guys. And if you were looking for one more inspo, I'm going to put fringe on one of these. And it kind of makes sense to use one of the ones that faces down. But you can just fringe it up, go crazy, put little beads at the bottom. And yeah, sky's the limit. So I'm over by 5. Do you guys still want to see next week? You can, if you need to go, we can go, and I'll just go ahead and throw next week on the mat. Actually, you've seen next week. It's this putting it together. So the week after that is the gemstone jewelry. We're going to take a break from seed beads, and we're just going to do some, I mean, there's still some seed beads in there because hello, me, but it's mostly focused on gemstone. And there's even a little bit of wire and some gluing of a new finding. It's a cool little finding right here. This one has a glue-in cup peg. So we'll do that the week after next. And then I'll show you guys the weeks after that. Since we're over so much today, I'll show you guys those next week, the remaining classes we have in all of our May. And I'm working on June. So yeah. Any questions for me, Carmi? Did I miss anyone? I know I went so fast.
No, I think you're great, Danielle. And I think everyone's looking forward to number 2, part 2.
Part 2 is going to be really fun. It has a little different part list. You want to check out if you want to bring a button next week and bring some wire, and we'll do bring some bicones if you want, or any bead, really. We'll put them together. All right. Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great week. And then I'll catch you next week, and we'll do some assembly. We'll put stuff together and have fun. I'm wishing you lots of creativity and a great weekend. Bye for now.